Welcome, everybody, to the very first episode of the Primal Foundations Podcast. I'm your host, Tony Pascolla. I have a very special guest today, Casey Ruff. He's a personal trainer, lifestyle coach, and performance enhancement specialist. Casey specializes in lifestyles such as low carbohydrate, ketogenic, carnivore diets. Casey is also the host of the Boundless Body Radio podcast and How to Make a podcast. Casey Ruff, welcome, and thank you for joining us on our very first episode.
Tony, dude, okay, so I've been on other podcasts. I'm always super grateful that anybody would ever want to chat to me about anything, but to be a very first guest on your show is beyond an honor. I'm just so thrilled to be here and so grateful for you. And thank you so very much for having me. It's a huge honor.
Oh yeah, we're very happy to have you. Automatically I said I'm gonna start a podcast. First person to reach out, Casey Ruff, for sure.
You're amazing. It's very cool, and it's such an honor.
So for those that don't know, Casey was actually my coach for a little bit. I had the crazy idea to do an Ironman on the carnivore diet, and reached out to Casey because a lot of people said it couldn't be done. It can't be done. It should not be done. And reached out to Casey. He gave me some fabulous nutrition advice, training advice, heart rate advice. And I just want to say again, thank you for that. Cause all of your wisdom got me through the Ironman and got me to the finish line. So thank you again.
Oh man. Well, you're very welcome. I think if anybody were to sit in on the call that we had, they would realize that you basically didn't need me for hardly anything other than just verifying your own ideas. You came with a great plan and had done a lot of research, and I didn't do much more than just say like, yeah, I think that's going to work great, dude. So It was a pretty easy session.
Oh, you got me there, which was awesome. So let's take a step back, and I just want to tell some of the listeners about your story and how you got to be a personal trainer and the path that kind of led you to the creation of your company, Boundless Body.
Yeah, absolutely. So, growing up, I was kind of the chubby kid, but I was always interested in sports. Got into ice hockey at a very young age. I discovered weightlifting and would be the nerd that would get the magazines and the books from the library and tape up workout programs on my unfinished basement wall, that kind of thing. Got into cycling eventually. And I was in college actually in my 20s to study architecture, but I joined a big box corporate gym in an off season just to have some place to go to do my training. And I started observing the personal trainers there. And I don't know, I thought it was fun. It was really appealing to me that these people were, working with their clients that looked like they were having fun. They were helping these people get healthy. Beyond that, they were also using heart rate monitors, which had been something I had used for a very long time. And, coming on to the staff when I did, I knew more about heart rate monitors than their most educated, trainer at the time knew about them. I knew how to program them and get the most out of them. So anyway, I ended up going into the personal trainer manager's office, asked him what I needed to do to get a job there. He told me what online certification to get, which I then got. I started that in March of 2007. Pretty soon after that, I was trained on how to use what is called a metabolic cart, which is basically a way to measure how our bodies are using calories, either resting or exercising at different levels. Like if you've ever seen a VO2 max test, we were testing, validating that. That's essentially what we were doing. That was kind of my entry into personal training. I've been very fortunate to make it a career now that's been, 16 and a half years. I love it every day. I have no intention of, stopping or retiring or doing anything different anytime soon. It's been a wonderful career. And so the story of Boundless Body LLC was really the story of my wife and I both working for the same big box corporation when the pandemic hit and we were put on unemployment. And so it was a really dark and confusing time. And I still to this day have no recollection of the first 2 weeks of the pandemic. I blocked out those memories. And, in the stress and confusion of everything that was going on as the gym was reopening, we just saw that, the clients that we did have were already changing their behaviors. They were working out from home. They weren't even going to the business complex where our gym, was. So there's no motivation or incentive for them to, go to this gym anymore. And they were dusting off their Thigh Masters and, whatever equipment they had at home when you couldn't buy anything. And so we decided that the best thing for us to do just be open up our own company and just continue working with our people. So that's how Boundless Body was born 3 years ago yesterday, I believe. And so we just, we work with our people locally here in the Salt Lake Valley. We also work with people virtually, doing nutrition coaching, personal training, making plans for people, helping them similar to what we did with you with cardiovascular type training and preparing them from different different events. My wife is also a Pilates instructor, and she also works with myofascial tissue and helps get people out of pain. So it's been a fun journey. It's been very interesting, lots of weird twists and turns and things like that. But yeah, it's been really rewarding.
And then going back to the heart rate monitor, I know you're saying you're getting into that. Didn't you have to like hawk something to go pay for your first heart rate monitor? Was that
dude, good memory. Good memory. I think my mom would still be mad at me about that. They were so mad. I don't even know why, but they gave me a TV VCR combo when I was 18 to take down to college. Yeah. And I returned it to get a Polar, I think it was an M210 heart rate monitor. I thought it was so cool because you could program like your zones into it and all that kind of stuff. And every training ride I would do it, I would like record my average heart rate and my max heart rate and how many calories I burned and all that stuff. So yeah, I did have to hawk some stuff to get my first monitor. Good memory.
Talking about the metabolic testing. So as you started, putting people on plans and getting these results, and what did you see as like when you first started in that industry, and then as you were going along, do you see any trends of different diets working and not?
That's a really great question. I love that question. So yes, we had this amazing tool that we could hook up a mask to somebody. It would be connected to a box via an umbilical cord, which was hooked up to a computer. And basically based on how somebody was breathing, we were able to tell basically the number of calories that they were burning doing different activities. And so we could do that test, like I said, while somebody was resting. So we could measure their baseline kind of resting metabolic rate. And we could also measure how many calories they would burn in different heart rate zones as they ramped up their heart rate, basically, as they picked up their intensity. And I'd have to say, like in the beginning, like in 2007, we didn't think of it much more than just like total calories. And, when somebody would come in and do a resting test, we knew that like you had to make sure the client was eating at least what the resting metabolic rate was. And we would have little sliders, right? We'd calculate like, okay, this is how many calories you burn at rest. So here's your activity level on an average day. You have an office job. That's maybe another 300 or 400 calories. How many calories do you want to work out in a day? We'd slide that up. And then, we would say like, okay, how much weight do you want to lose? Okay, great. We just need to create a caloric deficit. So let's take the energy that you're eating, the calories that you're eating. Let's take that down to where you want that to be. Great. We've got a 500 calorie deficit. You multiply 500 calorie deficit in a day to 7 days. That's 3,500 calories, which is 1 pound. And so if you want to lose 10 pounds, you just need to do this exact plan for 10 weeks and you will lose 10 pounds, right? So I think most of us know that doesn't really work. And as trainers, we would set this up for people and then just think that people were just really terrible at following the advice. Like nobody was able to linearly lose 1 pound a week based on the math equations that we were doing. And so it would be, kind of frustrating for the client. It would be frustrating for us to see that our people were not getting really good results. And again, we did the same thing while somebody was doing exercise. We'd ramp somebody up, slowly pick up their heart rate until they wanted to quit the test. We could see how many calories they would burn. The cool thing about our metabolic hearts, though, is they would go one step further. They would also measure the amount of fat versus the amount of carbohydrates that somebody was burning at all of those different stages. And initially, we would just look at that and say like, okay, at your target heart rate, you're burning about 70% carbohydrates. So your diet kind of has to match that. We need to make sure that you're eating plenty of those carbohydrates so that you can fuel those particular workouts that are burning lots of carbohydrates. And again, that's all we kind of knew about that kind of stuff. And it really was a huge turning point in my career when in 2012, we did a call. He was kind of a contractor. He was doing the same kind of testing that we were doing, but with a different company, his own kind of company. And he had learned through his experience working with very, very high-end professional triathletes and Ironman triathletes that he was able to manipulate the calorie burn rates of fat and carbohydrates by manipulating the diet. And so as a cyclist at the time, I'm consuming hundreds of calories of or hundreds of grams of carbohydrates every single day. That's the only way you could do a ride that was longer than 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours without bonking, is you just have to eat carbs before you go, eat carbs during your ride or run, eat carbs afterwards. And all of a sudden, this guy's getting on and he's saying, like, I'm feeding my athletes bacon and butter, and they're eating cream and like avocados, and they only need like 50 calories an hour as they're out there competing at the highest levels. And it's just like this mind-blowing, like, what the hell is this guy talking about? You're going to die, first of all. Like all that fat, like, is crazy. But it was also the understanding that you could really manipulate and change somebody's diet based on or how they burn calories based on what they're eating. And so that was really a revelation. And it wasn't until several years afterwards till I really truly got into the low carbohydrate and ketogenic and carnivore space. But that was at least the first kind of realization that, wow, diet does play a big part of this. And we can help, anybody who wants to increase their fat burn by changing their diet.
Yeah. I get the whole thing. A calorie is a calorie is a calorie, right? Like I can, Weight Watcher style, I can have this many calories. I can eat this, but what are you eating is going to be the biggest thing. 1,000 calories of Skittles versus 1,000 calories of red meat. It's not the same.
It's not.
Yeah.
It's not the same. That's such a good point. And, it's not just like weight manipulation. Like you hear people in the space, like, I hate to name drop, but maybe like a Dr. Lane Norton is talking mostly about like weight control or weight loss, weight gain. And like, yeah, maybe you can get away with that and call a calorie. And, maybe somebody could be on a high carbohydrate diet and be able to do that. Like that's fair, but you're only talking about weight control. You're not talking about like, how does a person eating all the Skittles feel? Like, what is their mental quality? Like, how are they sleeping? Like that's going to affect everything in their life. And so it's such a short-sighted way of looking at things. And it's unfortunate that it took me too long to learn those lessons.
I think we all went through that. And, looking back, as I was younger and most of us that were younger is like, you had to just eat less, move more, and then you lose weight. And that's how it's supposed to be. But we get through these cycles of you just keep doing it and yo-yoing and yo-yoing, and it just doesn't work. If it would have worked, it would have worked, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like, so if you're talking about like a simple machine where like, if you have a toaster and you put toast in it or bread in it and you get toast and the toaster never really changed, maybe you could use white bread or brown bread and like, it doesn't change the toaster. It's the same thing. But the problem with us is we're so much more complex and complicated that the things that we do for our input then change the output over time. And so we knew that if you were calorically in a deficit for too long, that metabolic rate would be measurably lower. Like I would see it on those metabolic carts. Like I measured, for example, a person that did the Biggest Loser contest, and after they got kicked off the contest, and after weeks of doing 1,200 calories a day and 6 hours a day of workouts, her metabolic rate was in the tank. It was about 1,000 calories less than what it should have been for somebody in her like same age, height, weight category. And so, like the things that we do and the things that we eat create a new reality that then changes the equation. So we can't just use math to solve a biological equation. It doesn't work.
Right. That's awesome points. I think you kind of touched base on the kind of athletic piece and athletic performance on this diet. And for you, for cycling especially, how has this affected you on those, long rides and your performance then versus now, and what kind of contributes to that?
Great question, dude. It is such a game changer. It's so amazing, as you well know, to live this type of lifestyle and to be able to perform athletically. So we have those two fuel sources, right? We've got the carbohydrates that we can burn. We've got fat that we can burn. We can also eat protein as the third macronutrient, but we don't generally use that as an energy source. It's more just the fat and the carbohydrates. And the problem is, one of storage, essentially. Like you can't store an endless amount of carbohydrates. I'm staying up in the mountains here in Utah at my client's cabin. I had to drive an hour and change through the mountains to get here. And it's so interesting to see such an amazing variety of tons of plants and shrubs and grasses and all of these plants at the end of summer growing everywhere. It's amazing and really beautiful. And you look out and you think like, there's no food. That there is no food that I could be eating. If I was living a plant-based life, I would die. Like there's so little calories available in the form of carbohydrates and plant foods. And again, I'm driving through very natural habitats at the end of summer when things are definitely growing and blooming everywhere, but there's just not a lot of food. So it's just a supply problem. Like if you have such a limited supply of carbohydrates and you can only store a limited amount, it's not really that big of a deal because you need to be eating proteins and fats. Like to kill an animal would be far easier and live on that for a way longer time. So the body has such a small storage of carbohydrates, but it has an almost endless amount of storage that can be had from fat. Like we can just add more and more and more fat. And, the most obese people you see, they may have 500,000, 600,000, 700,000 calories of fat energy that's already on their body. And if they just simply like stopped eating, their bodies eventually would learn how to use that energy source and burn it off and get rid of it. We know of people that have been studied scientifically that have done fasting for over an entire year, and they were totally fine. They lost a bunch of weight, several hundred pounds, and they would be fine. So again, it's a question of storage and what you can use. And so if I'm performing at a high level, but I'm burning mostly carbohydrates, my problem is I am going to run out. I have such a finite amount. Yes, I can take some in on the bike. I can try to consume, sugary drinks and gels and blocks and all the things that endurance athletes do, or anybody in performance. And, it makes your stomach hurt. It's logistically not that easy. My pockets were always stuffed with a whole bunch of crap. And you needed that because when the body runs out of the carbohydrates, you bonk. You just hit the wall. I think most of your listeners understand like the time that maybe they had a workout that was too hard or went too long. And it's almost like a car running out of gas. You're like, it's good, it's good, it's good. And then you're out of gas, like all of a sudden. And so that was the reality. Well, as a fat adapted athlete, you're not running on the carbohydrates, you're running on the stored fat. And again, even like the leanest person you've seen compete in the Tour de France, they don't have a lot of body fat, but they still have tens of thousands of calories of fat that they can use to help fuel their cycling, for example. So initially switching over to be, adding more fat in the diet eventually led me to a low carbohydrate diet, which eventually keto, eventually carnivore. Like your body is adapting to burning the fat, and you don't need any of this stuff. And so where I had to eat before and eat during rides and be really hungry afterwards, it became that like I could just go. Like it didn't matter whether it was 2 p.m. or 10 a.m., what I'd eaten that day. You just kind of go and you feel really good. And whether your ride's an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, generally, like it doesn't really make a difference. You could do the whole thing fasted. And I don't compete anymore, but I do have benchmark rides that I do around the valley that they basically tell me how I'm doing. Like one's basically like a 1 hour course, one's a 20-minute course. And I'm riding those faster now, not competing at age 39 than I was back when I was competing 10 years ago. And I feel way better doing it. So it's really interesting. But yeah, once you switch over to burning fat, it's really amazing how your performance can just increase. You're just not tied to the carbohydrates. You have the fuel on you. You just learn how to burn it.
Yeah. It hasn't really made the mainstream way yet. And it's kind of sad that that's, there's only this one box you have to live in. And like you said, the gels, the goos, all that stuff. I went on a bike ride. I can contest to the distance you can go, because I remember my first Century ride, and I know you're an avid cyclist. It's not my strong suit. It's so hard for me. I have little legs and it just takes me forever. But my first Century ride, I went 50 miles out. I had my water bottle. I had some electrolytes in it. And the only thing I stopped to have was coffee, a little bit of heavy cream in it because it was cold. And then I got back on my bike and went 50 miles back. And my coach at the time, who was planning my rides and my runs, and he was like, "What'd you pack?" I'm like, "Nothing." He's like, "Are you serious?" I'm like, "Yeah, nothing. I fat adapted, man. Like this, I ran on my own body fat." And but yeah, like Zach Bitter, the guy who he set the 100-miler record, and I think he's done it like a few times, but he's a low carb. I know he does some fruit and other things, but he really works on that fat adapted piece. You also mentioned talking about how going through a long ride and seeing all of this green, but not really food in sight. Can you kind of talk about kind of ancestrally us, thousands of years ago to today in terms of like how we structure our food and how we get food? And I think you also mentioned one thing I'd love for you to want to talk about, because I didn't know this, the birthday apple.
14 months.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Yeah, we'll get to that for sure.
Uh-huh.
So we look at some of our closest primate relatives, and we share a lot with them, but we've also diverged a lot from them. And for whatever reason, we chose different paths on how to feed ourselves. I love the work of Dr. Bill Schindler when he says that 3.1 million years ago, like when a human species took a rock and bashed it against another rock and created a stone tool, that was technology. That was the beginning of technology for us. And we didn't need claws or fangs or any of that kind of stuff when we had a rock that was far sharper and stronger, and we had the know-how to be able to use it and leverage it for different technologies. And so that kind of set us down the path of what Dr. Binky Bendor also calls, like, yes, we're omnivores, but we specialize. Like, animals specialize in certain things. There's lots of animals that can have both plants and animals, but that doesn't mean it's the perfect 50-50 split and they're eating both all the time. Like, bears eat bear diets, tigers eat tiger diets, turtles eat turtle diets. You know what I mean? Like, every species has their appropriate diet. And when we made tools, when we later on, figured out how to like manage fire, we could cook our food and extract more calories out of that. We learned the safest, best way to extract calories for us that allowed us to evolve, to grow our brains. It changed our digestive system. Humans don't hang as much as primates, but we can throw like 3 times as quickly as they can. So, hunting came into the picture, and we were really good, proficient hunters, to the extent that we were killing off all the big species. Wherever humans went, we were making giant fatty species go extinct because we would just overhunt them and kill them off. And so over time, we'd have to hunt, smaller and smaller animals. And that continued for a long time. Our brains grew until about 12,000 years ago is what they kind of speculate, that for whatever reason, in certain parts of the world, we just decided to settle down and we started agriculture. So we started raising, wheat and corn, again, depending on where you were on the planet, rice and things like that. And so that was a slow and kind of more gradual change that we settled down and started doing that and started changing our diet that way. The bigger change came about 200 years ago when we started to industrialize our food. We were producing food and shipping it all over the planet. We learned how to make sugar very inexpensive, where it was super expensive, hard to find, very rare, was now we can make it from beets and we can, again, ship it everywhere. We had this like weird kind of problem in the 1860s, where we were harvesting more cotton. So, there were more cotton seeds available, and these seeds had a polyunsaturated oil on them that would literally go rancid and was like smelly, and they needed to figure out what to do with it. So, they thought maybe we could make this into a wax and put it in, candles and soaps and things like that. But eventually, they created Crisco, stands for crystallized cottonseed, which is the first real like seed oil besides the kind of other stuff that was coming in and adulterating our olive oil at the time. And that made it into our diets. And the combination of those two things, 3 things, I guess: refined grains, cheap industrial sugar everywhere, and seed oils. What are seed oils? So now known as like vegetable oils, which ironically don't have a single drop of vegetables in them. Right. That snuck into our diet. And so evolutionarily, we needed to prefer the animal foods, and that's the way we're set up, again, anatomically, biologically, physiologically. Like that was our food that we decided to go to. And so when you change that quicker than we can adapt to the situation around us, we're going to have problems. And like that's why we started to see like heart attacks were not a thing, and now all of a sudden people are getting them. And we started to think that maybe it was fat and cholesterol, so we recommended low fat diets and plant-based diets. And then now we have an obesity crisis and a diabetes problem, and it's really crushed our health, unfortunately, because we're eating the wrong foods.
Yeah, you see this once we have this, the rise of agriculture, industrialization, and all of a sudden just disease so happily correlates.
Yep.
Right with it. And
yep.
That's
hockey stick curve.
Yeah, and it's kind of hard. It's hard now to kind of talk with people about that, because this is just such the norm now to kind of talk people into something else, a different type of diet, where, you don't have all of this food around you all the time. How do you work with your clients? If somebody's coming to reach out to you and they're just on the standard American diet, they're eating multiple times a day, how do you kind of get them over to, or kind of talk to them into, okay, this is what we feel is the best human aligned diet?
Yeah, great question. I love the point about the normalization, or like the normal isn't average. We look around and we see average. And I don't want to miss this. We've normalized the fact that you can walk into a grocery store in Toronto in March and buy mangoes. You know what I mean? Like, we have these fruits and vegetables available to us 365 days out of the year, when apples are only available very briefly in the year, very seasonally, very location based. You would only get them for a really short amount of time, and then they would be gone. They would not be a food that you could rely on full time. So part of all of that is like, we don't like we don't realize like, oh yeah, there's softball sized apples at the grocery store year round. Nobody
Mhm.
stops and thinks like, where did this come from? When did this come from? And most, according to one kind of research project they did, they said that the average size, the average age of an apple when it's been picked to when the consumer buys it in a grocery store is 14 months. That's
Wow.
it's pretty crazy. In the industry, they call them birthday apples because
Yeah.
they're picked. They need to be stored somewhere, usually in a silo. Lots of times they're pumped with some kind of wax chemical that keeps them,
Mhm.
more preserved and fresh. So by the time you see them in the beautiful cellophane container at Costco and these massive sugar bomb apples, like maybe stop and think like, okay, the Costco employee didn't just go pick this in the back of Costco. You know what I mean?
Right.
The question about clients, yeah. So I think you would agree that like we're not going to accomplish much by telling everybody they're wrong about stuff. I think we need to meet people where they are, and people have very entrenched ideas about what healthy nutrition is. And we've bastardized so many, you and I would consider healthy things that people, it takes time to come around. They know inherently that cholesterol is bad for you, that saturated fat is bad for you, that spinach and almonds are health foods.
Mhm.
Like people know that. And so we're not trying to change anybody's opinion, but if somebody's coming to us, we definitely want to hold their hands and help them understand some of these concepts. And so like a presentation I'm doing later today, really going to start by focusing on, the idea of calories in, calories out, and pointing out to the people who are attending the seminar, like, I'm sure you've tried this. Everybody has tried this. Why did it fail? If it was so awesome, why didn't you lose all the weight? Why wasn't the weight loss linear? Why did you plateau with very poor energy, feeling cold, feeling tired, feeling hungry, having cravings, and you gained all the weight back and then some? What happened? Like that's happening to 100% of people out there. We need to stop and consider that. And maybe let's talk about a different way forward, and let's teach people how to be really, really good at burning fat. And that's, I think, what most people want to do is learn how to use fat as an energy source. Do that by limiting carbohydrates, increasing protein, increasing fat in the diet, whether that's, fasting, carnivore diet, low carb approach, whatever that is for somebody. We can work with them and try to move them in that direction. But that's the thing we really try to focus on, is if somebody is willing to, let's at least get them eating more animal products, get them eating more eggs and red meat, and see where that path leads them. And I find more often than not that once somebody's willing to try to at least move in that direction, they start to notice, oh, I am feeling better, my energy is better, and they're more willing to continue to adjust things over time.
Awesome. I feel so my whole everything that I'm kind of doubling down on right now is I've named my company Primal Foundations because it has these 4 pillars. It's nutrition is the one piece, movement, strength, and recovery. The 2 things I want to talk about is kind of in line with nutrition is fasting. And I definitely want to talk about some strength training. So in terms of fasting, how do you utilize fasting in your life? Whether that be, on the day to day, because I know some people do the OMAD. You go from OMAD or you're not, you do 2 meals a day. So how do you incorporate fasting into your lifestyle?
Great question. And yeah, when I first transitioned over to carnivore, I found that doing OMAD was very easy for me to do. So essentially doing 1 meal a day, usually later in the day, I was eating strictly ribeyes, and it was easy for me to go 24 hours. And just to be clear, like there's a lot of semantics with this, but fasting to me is just like a period of time where you're not eating, right? Like you don't need to get caught up in like, is this intermittent fasted? Is this time restricted eating? Is this extended fasting? Like there's so many different protocols. And so the way I look at it is like, if you're not hungry, you don't have to eat. And if you're not eating, then you're fasting. And so the way I incorporated in my life for a long time was doing 1 meal a day. I did start to notice that it was becoming difficult for me to get an adequate amount of protein for my activity level. And I started to notice the signs and symptoms of a metabolic slowdown. I was feeling a little bit colder, especially my hands and feet. My energy wasn't as good. I could feel myself holding on to fat in the midsection. And so I decided I had to bail out of that. And so for the last year or 2, I've been doing really well with 2 meals a day. I will typically eat my first meal anytime around like 10 to 2, and that's normally like 6 to 10 hard-boiled eggs. And then I'll still have my big meal at night and focus on the fats and proteins. I get so satiated from that dinner meal. It is easy for me to go until the next meal. And I
Mhm.
do focus on trying to get that meal of the day where I'm eating exclusively eggs somewhere in the middle part of the day. But this week was a good example. Like there was one day where I knew I had back-to-back clients at a certain period, so I had to eat a little bit earlier than I normally would. There was
Mhm.
another day where I was simply too busy. I had to work through all of my clients. I wasn't done with work that day until 4 p.m. I missed my window to get that second meal, but I was fine. You know what I mean? Like you have the flexibility to fast. And so I want people to approach it in that way, not thinking like, I'm going to fast. It's going to look like this. It's exactly what
Mhm.
Tony or Casey do, or what somebody says, or like it's 16-8. It's like, no. Just focus on the right foods, focus on the animal products. Red meat is a great foundation, lots of fat, lots of protein, and then really give yourself permission to do what nobody really thinks about. And we're told not to think about is like eat to full satiety, like eat until you are fully satiated. Don't
Mhm.
try to eat until you're 80% full, or all the advice I used to give people in the past. Like no, eat until like you, whatever food you're eating, almost you get this like aversion where you almost don't even want to look at it anymore because you had enough and your body's telling you you've had enough. And then to fast is just a natural byproduct of that. You're just, I'm not hungry, I'm burning fat as my fuel source. Let me just go about my day. I'll eat when I'm hungry, and that's usually later on. And so I think people can make it really easy on themselves as far as fasting goes that way. There may be more specific reasons that somebody would do like a more targeted fast, for people having great results with things like cancer and chemo treatments by doing longer extended
Mhm.
fasting. I think people who are, really need to lose a lot of weight, as long as they're, really educated about their protocols and make sure they're not over fasting. There might be more specific things that those people need to do, but for the most part, I just want people to eat until they're fully satiated, and then just don't worry about eating until they feel hungry again.
Yeah, I think it's super intuitive just to kind of listen to your own body too. Sometimes we get in this mindset of like, oh, I'm doing the OMAD, or I'm doing this, or I'm doing a 3-day fast. I have to, I have to. Whereas just if your body's feeling you're hungry and you really need to eat, you eat. And then just to kind of echo what you're saying is, and you mentioned this to me before when we were talking in some coaching sessions. You're like, eat until you're full and have a couple more bites. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm like, Casey, I could do that. Yeah, sure. You're like,
It's
I
not
was like,
bad.
I'll eat more. Don't tell me I will. And you're like, yeah,
Not
eat,
bad.
eat 4 more bites. And then when you're really full, then don't eat. And then when you're hungry
Yep.
again, you eat. And
Yep.
people be so surprised how I'll post steaks, I'll post things on my Instagram of whatever. And people, man, like, man, you really eat like that? I'm like, yeah. They're like, you had 2 steaks? It's like, yeah. But that's all I eat. Like that's all I'll have for the day. I
Yep.
go in between. I go OMAD, and I'll have 2 meals a day. Sometimes I'll have a breakfast. Sometimes I'll have something later. But just I don't have to think about my meals. I'm not prepping all the time. I hate food prepping, and just having the ability, I call it like a superpower. The ability to fast is a superpower. And you don't have to
Yep.
be running all over the place all the time looking for food. And if I
Yep.
get into a place where I don't have it or access to it, or access to something that's healthy, I'm okay. People
Yep.
freak
You're
out
okay.
all the time. So,
Yep.
but
Totally. No,
uh
that's such a good point. And I want to just hit something that you mentioned, which I think is
mhm,
so important, that I love. Intuition, intuitive eating. If you were to turn me loose in a typical grocery store, and you just told me like, hey, everything is within the limits of what you can eat, go eat intuitively. I would go to the ice cream section and I would eat all the ice cream, and then I'd go grab a pie and I would eat the pie. Like that would be my intuitive eating. When you eat a carnivore style diet, already you've just eliminated so much of the grocery store.
mhm,
Now you have the meat section, the egg section, maybe dairy if that's included. Now try to intuitively eat, and I think you'll be able to do it. I'll give you a good example. Our good mutual friend, James Lehman, amazing
mhm,
person. Everybody should follow him, the carnivorist, on Instagram.
yes,
He does what you do, and he posts his board picture, right? Like every
mhm,
day he'll post like what's on the board, and it will be different combinations of meat. Sometimes it's chicken, different combinations of red meat. And this week he posted something with salmon on it. And I don't like salmon. I have salmon like once or twice a year. And
yeah,
all of a sudden I was like, damn, that salmon looks really good. And I still want to
mhm,
go eat that. I believe that's our bodies being intuitive with the right food that we should eat, where maybe some foods won't sound good, but for whatever reason, your body might be craving some nutrients, as long as you eliminate all the crappy processed stuff.
mhm. And speaking about ice cream and things like that, have you ever, I know myself, if I go off than the diet. And if I have something where it's like a sweet, a treat or whatever, I know how I feel after the fact. So has that ever happened to you where you're just like, oh, I'm going to try something, I'm going to have a little something sweet or whatever? How does your body react to that?
Yes, very poorly. Great question. It was 2 years ago. So in Utah, in the Salt Lake area, the 24th of July is called Pioneer Day, and it's a bigger holiday than even like the 4th of July around here. Like, it's a big deal. And it's when the Mormon pioneers kind of entered the valley and settled down. So the Mormons celebrate that. Anybody who's not Mormon celebrates Pie and Beer Day, kind of poking fun and also having something to celebrate. So I'll never forget. It was 2 years ago. I decided to have a pie, and I was planning on eating a piece or two, and I ate some, and then I ate some, and then I ate some, and then I ate some, and I could not stop until that thing was gone. I never have thought I've had anxiety, but that was one of the first things I noticed about carnivore diet is my mind just really settled down and quieted down. And I really love that feeling. Dude, after eating that pie, I couldn't sleep. My brain was just spinning and all this stuff that was never going to happen about the business failing and the house is going to fall over. My wife's going to leave. My dog's going to die. Like, it was crazy. And I learned that day, I'm like you, dude, I can't do it. I can't do sugar for sure. Recently, we went on a trip. I forgot to like take French fries off of the order. French fries come, normally they're gross anyway, so they weren't tempting. These ones look good. So I tried one, then I had two more, then I had two more, and then I had it in a ketchup. Dude, I leveled the whole thing. So I don't know. I would call myself a sugar addict. I think I need to be abstinent. I don't know what you call that, but I will tell you that those are two examples of me eating a lot more of stuff I know I don't want to be eating way longer than I wanted to stop. I could not stop. So I'm like you. I've got to be abstinent. I have to just not have those things. My life is so much easier. I feel so much better. My brain functions so much better when that's the case.
Yeah. And we talk about the body intuition. I mean, I'll be guilty. I've had, an ice cream or here, or there, or whatever. I'm like, you know what, let me have something, or celebrating with friends or whatever. And it's like, my body is the greatest lesson to me, because when I have those things, I'm like, the next day I'm like keeling over. I'm like, geez, I only had a cookie or like 2 scoops of ice cream. And I'm like, now I have to go strict again. I can't do this anymore. And then I might go 8 months, right? 8, 9 months. And then I might have another something little thing, because here's the thing. I tell people all the time, it's like, you can't be super strict, like to the point where it's like you're not going to stick with it anymore. It's okay to like go a little here and there, and it depends on the person. Again, fruit, like I try to avoid it now, because when I would mess around with fruit, and I always thought it was a good alternative to, like, if I go to a birthday party or whatever and I don't want the cake, I'm gonna have some fruit. That's the alternative for me. I'm making a healthy choice. But like you were saying, I can't stop eating it. I'll just have a piece, have a berry, have a this, have a that, and I just would overconsume way more calories. And I have to stay away from it as well. But in terms of increasing that metabolic rate, we've kind of talked about things to eat. We talked about fasting. So I want to kind of couple these next two together, some strength training and movement. And so how do you approach that? What's your philosophy for your clients of, strength training, like frequency, duration, and then movement? What is the right amount for, like, let's just talk about like an average person?
Amazing question. I'm so glad you're so mindful of the way you call it movement. A lot of people call it exercise, and I think it's very mindful of you to call it movement. And I do the same thing. I call it the same thing. So when we're talking about positive impacts on our metabolism, we can leverage exercise to have our metabolic rates be running at a really good speed and burning, lots of fat, lots of calories, which is basically kind of what we want. And so strength training is a big part of that. Strength training teaches the body how to be inefficient with calories, which, again, that doesn't sound like a great thing, but what that means is that the body has plenty of calories and it needs those calorie resources to do things like build muscle or make your bones stronger, like all those things that we think are very beneficial, and they are. It's just an expensive process. So your body's not going to go down that path if it doesn't have to. It wants to conserve and be really miserly, and save calories. And that's what cardiovascular that we even call it cardiovascular exercise, quote unquote, is a
Mhm.
little bit weird. Like aerobic exercise is, what it should be more commonly referred to. But anyway, doing the cardiovascular type exercise, aerobic exercise, that teaches us over time to be more efficient with our calories. So that's good if you are doing triathlon, running a marathon, like that will help you get to the finish line using the least amount of calories. But that's also going to have a decreasing effect on your metabolism, metabolic rate. Strength training, again, is the opposite. So the type of strength training that I was coached up to do for many, many years is called functional training. I'm a hockey player. So if I were to train me in a gym, I would find all the movements that look like hockey and I'd hop back and forth like I was skating, or I'd swing a heavy stick like it's, me slashing my buddy in the thigh or something, like all the things that I might look like hockey, and do them in the gym. And I've really come to appreciate the work of Dr. Doug McGuff and John Little, who wrote the book Body by Science. And their concept is, look, like none of those things are actually hockey. Hockey is on ice. It's on a sheet that's a specific size. You play it with your smack talking buds. It's 5-on-5 with goalies. Like there's a context, right? And so you can't really mimic that in the gym. What you can do in the gym is make yourself very strong, and that will make you strong for whatever event you want to go do, and then go spend the rest of your time practicing your sport in the context of your sport. And so they promote really no more than about 15 to 20 minutes a week of exercise, strength training exercise. I recommend more than that for people, especially if they are getting good results and want to do that. But the concept is that you use whatever equipment you have, whether it's machines, free weights, cheap, inexpensive like bands that you can get from Amazon. But the goal is to push yourself inside of a set to this point of like, I call it's been called like muscular failure. It's like muscle success, where you cannot any longer push a weight. Like you're getting to that wall of like, man, I like get a little bit of anxiety. It's not like a high intensity as far as like your heart rate or like your sweating rate. Like you could do this mostly nose breathing, but the point is to tell your body that the level of strength that you are at is inadequate, and you can only do that by pushing yourself all the way to failure. So the body says like, wow, like, okay, like I don't know what this guy was doing, but we need to get stronger. We have to get stronger. He was pushing something we couldn't push anymore. So let's shuttle those resources, shuttle the calories over to building muscle, building connective tissue, strengthening the bones, like we talked about. And so whenever somebody does strength training, they can do things very safely. They don't have to move quickly, but they want to get to like a very close to muscle failure. And again, all of that has a positive impact on the metabolic rate. People should notice that their strength is improving. They're having good energy. They feel warm. Those types of things. So yeah, whatever anybody else wants to add to that, like, kettlebell training, TRX training, that's all fine. And we've got so many different tools that we can utilize and teach people to do lots of different things. But in general, following the principle that when you strength train, you go pretty deep. It's pretty intense as far as that like muscular kind of intensity goes.
Yeah, I stopped to write down muscle success. I think that's a fact. I'm stealing that 100% for all my clients, because we always talk about, and I say this in the gym all the time, and you might have the same experience. I was like, if you're trained to complete failure, you're trained to fail. And there's a lot of ego that comes in the gym sometimes, and where people want to compete with one another. And I've had a situation where I'm watching the room. I got a class of 8 and we're doing whatever, kettlebell training, some lifting, it's a strength and conditioning class. And I cut the whole thing short. I think I cut it like at 18 minutes. It was supposed to be designed for like 24. It's like every minute on the minute type deal. Everybody's form was going. People were going way too hard, and they have heart rate monitors. Some people have them, MyZones.
Yep.
And they think it's okay to be in the red. And I'm like, that's not good to be in you can't just redline the whole entire class. And I was like, all right, we're done. And everybody's like, what? I was like, that's good. We're good. I was like, I'm happy. I like everybody was putting in some great work. We're good. If you want to get on like a recovery walk or a recovery row, you can. And they were like, wait, so we can leave? I was like, yeah. They were like, they didn't want to believe that they felt like I was tricking them. And I was like, that's what I get a lot is that mentality. You like run across that when you have clients and you talk about strength training and, the minimum effective dose. That's something I think I hear from a lot of different people. I think I've heard you say too, the minimum effective dose. Do they kind of give you any pushback or kind of question like, why I can do more? Why can't I do more?
Yeah, and that's such a I love that you stopped that class. That's to me the sign of a really, really good trainer who knows what they're doing and knows their people and can explain that really well. Yeah, you sometimes do get pushback. We would get the people when we were at the corporate gym, especially, that would be like, yeah, but like I want to push myself harder. Like I want to go do these classes. Like you're telling me I've got to work out easier, and I'm like, you can do whatever you like, but think about whether you want a hard workout or whether you want to get results. You take your pick. Like
Mm-hmm.
you can have hard workouts for sure, but they're not going to lead you to the results that you want. So they need to be really mindful about that. And then, yeah, use the rest of the time to move. Any kind of movement is great. Whatever people enjoy. Walking in particular has been my absolute favorite thing since the pandemic. I think, as long as you're not over like pushing it too far, like into pain or things like that, I think it's like a linear benefit. Like the more you can do it, the better. Get outside, get fresh air. I started, years ago when we were doing step challenges, I started parking at the very back spot of a parking lot and walking a long way to the store. I never stopped doing that. And so that's just, accumulated so many steps over the years. And people can just do really simple things to just move, especially if they're outside in nature as ideal. But either way, just any kind of movement that people really enjoy, just as long as it's keeping that intensity fairly low.
Yeah. And there's something to that too, because I mean, if you were to talk to me 5 years ago and people were talking about like walking, I'd be like, walking, like,
Come on.
what walking? It's not that big of a deal. It's not that hard. Then we got locked down, pandemic. I was still working out in the apartment, I was doing something. I was working out still, push-ups, sit, whatever. Sean T Insanity. I was doing all those kind of things in the apartment because you couldn't do anything. All the gyms were shut down. And I was still working out, but I was somewhat trying to eat healthy. We're all locked down, so everybody kind of gorged a little bit and ate things that they shouldn't, me in particular. And I just was like, how the hell am I gaining so much weight? I'm working out. I'm not eating super bad. I'm like, how am I gaining so much weight? And I started to realize, well, I'm a PE teacher by trade. Every day I'm walking, and like my watch is set to 30,000 a day.
Wow.
And like it'll go off at 30,000. And sometimes I'm hitting that. It's like mid-afternoon, 30,000. Because we go one side of the building, the other side of the building. I got to get equipment. I got to go here. I got recess duty. I'm on my feet all day. And I just did not think about it. And then when you sit down for that long every day for 3 months, it all adds up. And I was like, now I'm a big fan of walking. My mom, she has lost 25 pounds.
Wow.
She's actually doing very, very well. I got her. She's not a carnivore by any means, and my sister too. She isn't a carnivore by any means, but they're like making decisions of we're working out more. My mom's like, I'm getting my walks in. She does aerobics in the pool. And she's like, if I have a burger, right, I don't have the bun. I try to skip the French fries. She'll still do greens and she'll do chicken, all kinds of stuff like that. But she's just being more mindful. And she's just like, she gets her walks in. And just by eating a little bit better and walking, I mean, I want her to start strength training for sure. And I'm trying to work with her. Like, it doesn't have to be barbells. It could be machines, for right now. And she needs that as she's getting older. But I mean, just that little change of walking an hour and some change every day, plus eating right. Wow.
Huge.
Simple.
Yeah. Simple. Yep.
Awesome.
I love it. And yeah, people can find really easy ways to work that in. Like take a walking meeting. Like there's lots of meetings that we do that you can take over the phone. Like you can find ways to be creative and, take 15-minute breaks if that's all you can do. But yeah, it will definitely reward itself for sure. Great practice.
It's awesome. Casey, I know we're about like 45 minutes in. I don't want to take too much of your time, but I think this has been an awesome conversation. And again, I'm just so happy to have you on the first episode. And I think all the listeners get it. You just dropped a lot of knowledge for us, which is amazing. So how can people find you, get in touch with you, and follow you?
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Tony. It's really been a pleasure. And I can say after one episode, you are a natural host, dude. You do a great job. That was a really great interview and you asked really good and interesting questions. The easiest place to find us is on our website, which is myboundlessbody.com. They can find our podcast, which is Boundless Body Radio. That's also found on all the different platforms. We do releases every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Yeah, and on our website you can find our social media stuff. So the usual Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, that kind of thing, if you want to follow us there. But also, one of the first things you'll see on the website is a book now button where anybody around the world can book a complimentary 30-minute session. We can talk about your goals, we can talk about nutrition or exercise, whatever somebody wants to chat about. I've also had tons of people that really just reached out to like introduce themselves and got to know some of our listeners. So it's been really fun, but that would be the best place. And like I said, we always offer that free 30-minute consultation for anybody who wants to chat, and they can find that on the website, myboundlessbody.com.
Awesome. I'll definitely link that in the show notes. And thank you again. And thank you everybody for listening to the Primal Foundations podcast. All right, we'll stop the recording.